My name is Johan Norberg, a writer and an analyst, and I was born and raised here in Sweden. I was 3 years old when the Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded to Milton Friedman, here in Stockholm. Milton Friedman did a lot more than win the Nobel Prize in Stockholm. He had a thought-provoking message that won him thousands of advocates and opponents all over the world. In 2002, I had the pleasure of meeting Professor Friedman, and the thing that struck me was his intellectual curiosity. His research led him to believe in the power of free markets and economic freedom. Some people say that free trade, economic freedom, makes us better off. Others say that free trade takes away people's jobs. I'm in Hong Kong, which has been ranked as having the most economic freedom in the world for the last 16 years. Let's consider what that means. In 1980, Friedman presented his ideas to America through a 10-hour PBS series that was called Free to Choose. He traveled to places he felt could best communicate his ideas.
If you want to see how the free market really works, this is the place to come.
Hong Kong, a place with hardly any natural resources. About the only one you can name is a great harbor. Yet the absence of natural resources hasn't prevented rapid economic development.
When Milton Friedman rode on this ferry in 1980, Hong Kong was not a part of China, but was leased to Britain as a colony. And it had just made an incredible journey, one that demonstrated to the world that even the poorest countries can develop. After the Second World War and the Communist Revolution in China, Hong Kong had no prospects, no natural resources and little land that could be cultivated. But almost by accident it was given economic freedom. The British government couldn't be bothered with local Hong Kong affairs, and the governor here happened to favor free markets. So Hong Kong never introduced all those policies that other governments did. No tariffs, no regulations or government intervention in the economy. So the economy could evolve in a natural way. As a result, Hong Kong became an economic powerhouse. When Friedman came to Hong Kong in 1980, it could boast statistics on life expectancy and infant mortality that equaled Western countries. Incredibly, it was on its way to become richer than its colonial ruler, Britain.
This thriving, bustling, dynamic city has been made possible by the free market, indeed the freest market in the world. The free market enables people to go into any industry they want, to trade with whomever they want, to buy in the cheapest market around the world, to sell in the dearest market around the world. But, most important of all, if they fail, they bear the cost. If they succeed, they get the benefit. And it's that atmosphere of incentive that has induced them to work, to adjust, to save, to produce a miracle.
And what a miracle it's been. Friedman was standing next to the tallest building on the skyline. And just look at that skyline now. There are more skyscrapers here than in all of New York City. Between 1950 and 2000, Hong Kong's GDP per capita increased more than 10 times. Friedman concluded that this success was due to the free market.
This hasn't been achieved by government action, by someone sitting in one of those tall buildings telling people what to do. It's been achieved by allowing the market to work. The complete absence of tariffs or any other restrictions on trade is one of the main reasons why Hong Kong has been able to provide such a rapidly rising standard of life for its people.
In 1980, when Milton Friedman wanted to see a truly free market, he had to come here, to Hong Kong. Since then, much of the world has followed in Hong Kong's path. In an effort to get out of its stagnation of the 1970s, the US and Western Europe began to return to the ideals of free competition. Taxes were lowered, tariffs were reduced, and regulations slashed. Free markets have spread around the world. At the same time, we've seen the fastest human progress ever. and it has been led by the countries that opened up their economies. In fact, average incomes around the world have almost doubled. When we say that a market is free, it sounds a bit like a dog-eat-dog economy, but that is not what Friedman had in mind. He thought that the best explanation of why the free market works was developed more than 200 years ago in Scotland, where Adam Smith taught at the University of Glasgow. Smith's book, The Wealth of Nations, explains why free choice and voluntary association is often more well-functioning and orderly than commands from the top. Voluntary association is what we do together of our own free will. When these people buy and sell to each other and none is subject to force or fraud, that is voluntary association. It is anything that is going on between consenting adults. When you visit marketplaces around the world, they can sure look like chaos, but underneath the surface it is highly organized. Not from above, but by people's own interests and actions. Friedman thought that Adam Smith had the answer.
Adam Smith's flash of genius was to see how prices that emerged in the market, the prices of goods, the wages of labor, and the cost of transport, could coordinate the activities of millions of independent people, strangers to one another, without anybody telling them what to do. His key idea was that self-interest could produce an orderly society benefiting everybody. It was as though there were an invisible hand at work.
What did Adam Smith mean by self-interest and an invisible hand? By self-interest, he wasn't thinking of greed, just taking what you can get. He was thinking of the day-to-day decisions that we all make to better our lives. The clothes we wear, what car we drive, even whether we like our fish really fresh.
The market tells producers not only what to produce, but how best to produce it through another set of prices. The cost of materials, the wages of labor, and so on. Walk down any street in Hong Kong and you'll see the impersonal forces of the market in operation.
If I want to buy a tomato, I could buy one right here at the market from Hung Choi. But if everybody suddenly wanted to buy tomatoes, perhaps because we get new information about how good they are for our health, well, then there would be too few tomatoes. So Hung Choi's suppliers would have to charge him more. In that case, I have to pay more to lay my hands on one. If prices increase, farmers will notice. Without knowing us or without even having heard about the new health information, they can see with their own eyes that they would make more money if they produced tomatoes rather than, say, broccoli. And in that case, more farmers will move into tomato production and the supply will be increased. When I buy a tomato and when someone else is buying some fish, we control the supply on the market. We vote with our pocketbooks, and all around the world, people spring into action to satisfy our demands. Every purchase sends a message. This is how the market economy works in every sector, from tomatoes to Apple computers. And this is Adam Smith's invisible hand. To make your life better, you have to better the lives of others. Invisible hands are all around us. Friedman borrowed an example from economist Leonard Read to show that something that we take for granted and use every day is the result of a complex interaction between thousands of people.
Look at this lead pencil. There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore.
But obviously, the pencil is no longer one of our most important tools of communication. This is, and the production of a smartphone is not less complex, to say the least. This display is made in Japan, and the camera in Vietnam. The microphones come from Austria and the chipset from France. The memory is produced in Korea and the battery in China. And the software and design centers are all over the world in countries like India, Finland, Britain and the US. Thousands of people on several continents cooperated to make these phones so that we could have them. People from different countries, different cultures, people who had never even met.
That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
We all want to know what will happen in the future. We all want to know how countries can become richer. And looking at Hong Kong and around the world, we can see that it is where people have the most freedom, where government is the smallest. They are the countries where the standard of living is the highest. They are the countries where people's income is the greatest. We have a choice of smartphones, tomatoes, even trucks, because of competition. Sometimes the price is too high, sometimes the product doesn't work, and sometimes the service is lousy. But in that case, someone else can enter the market and take all the customers. So every company has to offer us something better to stay in business. Some succeed, but some fail. And it's that risk of failure that really scares us.
When a businessman faces trouble, a market threatens to disappear, or a new competitor arises, there are two things he can do. He can turn to the government for a tariff or a quota or some other restriction on competition, or he can adjust and adapt. In Hong Kong, the first option is closed. Hong Kong is too dependent on foreign trade so that the government has simply had to adopt a policy of complete non-interference. That's tough on some individuals, but it's extremely healthy for the society as a whole. Only the businessmen who can adapt, who are flexible and adjustable, survive, and they create good employment opportunities for the rest.
So this is the kind of boxes that you were producing here when Milton Friedman came by to visit?
Mr. Chung makes metal containers. Nobody's ordered him to. He does it because he's found that he can do better for himself that way than by making anything else. But if demand for metal containers went down, Mr. Chung would soon get that message.
And Mr. Jung is still here, and nowadays he produces more things for the tourist trade. But when only the flexible and adaptable survive, thank you, Mr. Jung, it means that other businesses fail. Economists call this constant renewal of the economy creative destruction. If we want to increase our wealth and opportunities, we have to stop doing old things in old ways and start doing innovative things in better ways. In other words, we have to be creative. But when consumers move on to new goods, it can be difficult and painful because old factories and old shops close and people lose their jobs. That is the destructive part. And yet, most economists think that creative destruction is necessary for economic development. Mrs. Lee starts out every day with her lunch, her teapot, and her cell phone. Cell phones are important for boat drivers around here because they used to pass messages by shouting to one another. Not terribly efficient and very bad for your voice. Hong Kong has the most cell phones in the world, 1.7 cell phones per person. But all around the globe we've seen a cell phone revolution. In 1980 there were 11 million cell phones on the planet. Today almost 4 billion people have access to cell phones. This is an example of creative destruction. It used to be all landlines made of copper, but now they become less and less important, especially in the developing world. This farmer in Bangladesh was always dependent on one buyer of her eggs and had to accept his prices. But now she can check the price of eggs in other village markets with her cell phone before she sells, and so she can negotiate a better price. In Tanzania, it used to be that the customer often had to sit and wait for hours at the butcher's for the meat to arrive. And sometimes in Peru, the meat had to wait because the customers didn't know that it was already there. Today, you coordinate the business with a cell phone, and the food ends up in people's stomachs and not in the garbage. We have rarely seen a technology that has meant so much for human development, but that was not the intention. The telecom companies wanted more market share. Those who adapted and distributed the technology locally wanted to make money, and butchers and egg farmers just wanted to improve their own lives. Adam Smith would say that it was as if they were led by an invisible hand when they rolled out this technology faster than any technology in world history. And many would say that this revolution did more to give the average person power and to reduce poverty more than any government program. But all progress comes at a cost. Market forces are both creative and destructive. As people buy cell phones, they ditch their home phones. And then there is no need for all those workers who used to connect homes to wires and repair telephone lines. And that is tens of thousands of people who worked hard and supported their families, and through no fault of their own lost their jobs, and whose skills might not be in demand as the technology takes a new leap. Some succeed in inventing the next smartphone and become incredibly rich. Others are stuck with an obsolete technology. Some win, some lose, and the result is something that most people have a problem with: inequality. Here in the United States, you've accepted more inequality of outcome. But the economy is not a zero-sum game. In other words, we're not fighting over ever smaller pieces of the pie. The pie is constantly growing larger as people and businesses become more productive. And the world is getting wealthier all the time. In the last 100 years, with relatively free markets, we have created more wealth than in the 100,000 years before. And as a result, we have reduced extreme poverty around the world, more than people ever dreamed was possible. 25 years ago, you had to work for 456 hours to be able to buy a cell phone. Today, after all the productivity increases that businesses and innovators have introduced, you only have to work for 4 hours. And of course, it's a better deal today. This is not just a phone. It also doubles as a texting device, a calendar, a camera, almost everything. In these same 25 years, the cost of a personal computer has been reduced from 435 hours to 25 hours. And you really couldn't compare it to those original PCs that wouldn't be able to run any of the software or the operating systems that we use today. People with a lot of money can afford to be early adopters. They can pay ridiculous amounts for the first versions of cell phones and personal computers. And that's a good thing for us, because they create bigger markets, so the companies get revenue, so that they can streamline production and create lower cost versions so that all of us can buy one. And historically, this seems to be the case. Free markets regularly turn luxuries into consumer goods. This may seem hard to believe, but the average rate of ownership for refrigerators, air conditioners, and dishwashers is higher among poor American households today than they were for all American households in the early 1970s.
Fresh eggs here. Chicken wings, chicken legs.
When people are free, they are able to use their own resources most effectively, and you have a great deal of productivity, a great deal of opportunity. The major beneficiaries are always the small man. The man who has power, who's at the top of a society, he's going to do well whatever kind of society you have. It's the society which gives the small man the opportunity to go his way, which is going to benefit him the most.